The dish was still warm when she set it down on my kitchen table, and she did not look at me. She did not say goodbye. She just placed it there, smoothed her apron once, and walked back down the porch steps into the snow. That dish sat on my table for 3 days before I understood what it meant. 3 days. 3 sunrises where I kept waiting for her to knock the way she always had, 2 short taps and a pause, and the knock never came. If you are picturing a fight, a raised voice, a jealous husband storming across a field, stop. This is not that kind of story. What actually happened is quieter than that, and quieter is worse. Stay with me, because the rule that took my best friend from me was never written down anywhere. It was never read from the pulpit. And that is exactly why it worked. My name is Rebecca, and I grew up in a strict old order Amish settlement in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left when I was 28, and now I tell the stories we were taught to swallow with our coffee and carry to the grave. If you have ever lost a friend without being told why, if you have ever been punished with silence instead of words, tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and I answer the ones I can. Subscribe if you want to hear the parts of plain life the postcards never show, and like this video only if you believe a woman's friendship is worth more than a whispered warning. To understand what happened between me and Sarah, you have to understand the shape of the world we lived inside. Our community was governed by the Ordnung, the unwritten and half-written body of rules the bishop and ministers upheld. The Ordnung told you how wide your hat brim could be, how many pleats belonged in your prayer covering, whether your buggy could have rubber on the wheels, and whether your kitchen could have linoleum. But the Ordnung I want to tell you about was the other one. The Ordnung that lived in the eyes of older women at church. The Ordnung that lived in what mothers did not say to their daughters. The Ordnung that told a married woman exactly how close she was allowed to stand to another married woman, and for how long, and about what. A wife belonged to her husband, her children, and her church, in that order. Friendship was permitted, of course. We quilted together. We canned together. We stood in each other's kitchens washing dishes while the men talked in the barn. But there was a line, and no one ever showed you the line, and you only learned where it was by crossing it. Sarah and I grew up 2 farms apart. Our mothers were sisters in the faith, not blood, but close enough. We started school together at 6, sat on the same wooden bench, shared the same slate. When my little brother died of a fever the winter I was 9, Sarah was the one who sat with me behind the woodshed while I cried into her apron. She did not tell me to be strong. She did not tell me it was God's will. She just held the corner of my sleeve and let the cold do the rest. We married within a year of each other. She married Amos. I married John. Our farms were close enough that I could walk to her back door in the time it took a kettle to boil. And for the first years of our marriages, that is exactly what I did. Every Tuesday, and most Fridays, and any afternoon the babies were sleeping. We baked. We mended. We talked. And that is where the trouble began, though I did not know it yet. I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you that Sarah and I were anything other than friends. We were friends. Sisters, really. What we shared was the kind of closeness that women in plain communities are not supposed to name, because naming it would mean admitting that our husbands were not the center of our emotional lives. Our husbands were the center of our households. Sarah was the center of my week. The first warning came from her mother-in-law, Mary. It was late fall, and I had walked over with a jar of apple butter. Mary was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, and when I came in, she looked at me the way older women look at a stain on a clean tablecloth. She said, without smiling, "Rebecca, you are here often." That was all. 6 words. And then she turned back to her knitting. I laughed it off. I told Sarah about it on the porch, and Sarah squeezed my hand and said, "Don't listen to her." But I saw something move across Sarah's face that I did not have a name for yet. A flinch. A small door closing somewhere behind her eyes. The second warning came at church. One of the older women, a preacher's wife, pulled me aside after the service and said, "A wife's heart is a lamp. It should light one house." I remember standing there with my Bible in my hands and not knowing what to say. I nodded. I always nodded. That is the first thing they teach you, before you can even read. You nod, and you smooth your apron, and you go home. The third warning did not come to me. It came to Sarah. I only learned about it later. Amos's uncle, who was a minister, had visited their farm and spoken to Amos alone in the barn for an hour. When Amos came back into the house, he told Sarah that she was spending too much time in another woman's kitchen, and that people were talking, and that a wife who leaned on a friend was a wife who was not leaning on her husband. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He just said it, and then he asked her to pass the bread. Sarah told me none of this at the time. What she did was slowly, gently, begin to disappear. She stopped answering the door on Tuesdays. She started saying she was tired. She started sending her oldest daughter to bring back the pie plates instead of walking them over herself. I told myself she was busy. I told myself the new baby was hard. I told myself 100 things, because the truth was too cold to hold. And then came the dish. The one I told you about at the beginning. She brought it over on a Wednesday in February, filled with a stew I had cooked for her family the week before when her baby was sick. She washed it. She dried it. She walked it across the field in the snow. She set it down on my table. She did not look at me. She smoothed her apron, and she left. And I understood, standing there in my own kitchen with the smell of wood smoke on my dress, that I had just been told goodbye in the only language a plain woman is allowed to use. I did not cry that day. I did not cry for weeks. What I did was something worse. I started to make myself smaller. I stopped walking past her farm on the road. I stopped looking for her at church. I started sitting 3 benches back instead of 2. I learned, without anyone teaching me, that when a woman in our community is told her friendship is dangerous, she does not fight. She folds. She becomes a smaller shape, and she waits for the shape to become a habit, and eventually she forgets she was ever any other size. It took me years to see the whole picture. The rule was never about Sarah and me specifically. The rule was about every woman in every kitchen in every settlement. A wife who has a best friend has a witness. A wife who has a witness has someone who might, one day, ask her if she is all right. And a woman who is asked if she is all right might, one day, answer honestly. That is what the rule was protecting against. Not friendship. Testimony. I did not leave the community for another 6 years after that dish appeared on my table. I left for a lot of reasons, and Sarah was only one of them. But I want to tell you that on the night I finally walked out, with my 2 youngest asleep in the back of a hired van and my hands shaking so hard I could not fold them, the last thing I looked at on my kitchen table was that same dish. I had never given it back. I had never had the chance. Years later, sitting in a small office with pale blue walls, a therapist asked me to describe the moment I first understood I was not free. I did not talk about the bishop. I did not talk about my wedding. I talked about the dish. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Rebecca, they did not take your friend from you. They taught your friend to take herself from you, and that is a different kind of grief." I sat in that office and I cried for the first time in 20 years, not for me, but for Sarah, who never got a therapist, and who is still, as far as I know, in that kitchen, smoothing her apron, lighting one house. If you are watching this and you have lost a friend to a rule no one ever wrote down, I want you to hear me. It was not your fault. It was not her fault. The system was built to make women small enough to fit through its doors, and the first thing it takes is the woman who might have reminded you that you were once bigger than this. Find her again, if you can. Write her a letter. Knock on her door, twice short and a pause. And if she cannot open it, do not blame her. Blame the rule that taught her hands to stay still. I still have the dish. It sits on a shelf in my apartment, next to a plant I have somehow kept alive for 3 years. Sometimes, on winter afternoons, when the light comes in low and the radiator ticks, I take it down and I hold it, and I remember that a friendship was set down on a table and walked away from in silence. And then I put it back, gently, because it is still warm. It has always been warm. It was the silence around it that was cold. Your friendship was never the sin. The rule was.